Hello, Yankee. Welcome. Hello, Avuso Verapano. As usual, we'll give some time for people to come in. We'll see how many people caught the note that we're starting an hour early. We'll see. I'm wondering if starting an hour early will be better for everybody, myself included. So we might give this a shot a couple weeks. As you're coming in, please say hello in the chat if you like, so we know who's here. All right, we'll get started in a minute or two. Okay. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Ekang samayang bhagava vesalayang viharati mahavane kuttagara salayang attako mahapajapati gotami yena bhagavatena upasankami Upasankamitva bhagavantang abhivaditva ekamantang atasi ekamantang titakos mahapajapati gotami bhagavantang etadavocha sadhu me bante bhagava sankitena dhammang desetu yang ahang bhagavato dhammang sutva eka vupakatta appamatta atapini pahitata viharayanti Yoko twang gotami dhamme janeyasi eme dhamma saragaya samvattanti no viragaya samyogaya samvattanti no visangyogaya achayaya samvattanti no apachaya mahichataya samvattanti no apichataya asantuttiya samvattanti no Santuttiya Sanaganayaka Samvatani no Pavivekaya Kosajaya Samvatanti no Viryarambaya Dumbarataya Samvatanti no Subharatayati Ekam Senagotami Darayasi Neso Dhammo Neso Vinayo Neso Santusasananti Ye chako twang gotami dhamme janeyasi ime dhamma viragaya samvatanti no saragaya visangyogaya samvatanti no samyogaya apachayaya samvatanti no vachayaya apichataya samvatanti no mahichataya santuttaya samvatanti no asantuttiya pavivekaya samvatanti no sanagikaya viryarambaya samvatanti no kosajaya subharataya samvatanti no dubharataya ti ekang sena gotami dharayasi eso dhammo eso vinayo estang sattu sasananti. All right, English. One time the Sublime One, the discourse to Gotami. One time the Sublime One was staying at Vaisali, and the peak grew fall in the great forest. Then Mahapajapati Gotami approached the Sublime One, and having bowed down to the Sublime One, stood to one side. As she was standing to one side, she said, "It would be good, Venerable Sir, if the Sublime One would teach me the Dhamma in brief, such that, having heard the Dhamma from the Sublime One, I might dwell alone, secluded, diligent, earnest, and resolute." Gotami, of the qualities of which you may know, these qualities lead to passion, not to dispassion, to being fettered, not to being unfettered, to self-aggrandizement, not to self-effacement, to overweening ambition, not to modesty, to discontent, not to contentment, to entanglement, not to seclusion, to laziness, not to arousal of energy, to being burdensome, not to being unburdensome. You Gotami may definitely hold. This is not the Dhamma. This is not the Vinaya. This is not the teacher's instruction. As for the qualities of which you Gotami may know, these qualities lead to dispassion, not to passion, to being unfettered, not to being fettered, to self-effacement, not to self-aggrandizement, to modesty, not to overweening ambition, to contentment, not to discontent, to seclusion, not to entanglement, to arousal of energy, not to laziness, to being unburdensome, not to being burdensome. You Gotami may definitely hold. This is the Dhamma. This is the Vinaya. This is the teacher's instruction. All right, friends, welcome to another Dhammapalooza at a different time, a little earlier than normal. Hello, Wasabi-chan and Dharma Learner. Good to see you. So this is our 2-hour Festival of Dhamma of the Magaseka community, where we come together to do a variety of different Dhamma-related activities. We just did some chanting. Maybe later we'll do some meditation in between. Maybe we'll have questions and answers. Maybe we'll read a sutta. Each Dhammapalooza is a blank slate at the beginning. We don't know how it's going to end up because it is community guided. So, for the next couple of minutes, if you have a question you'd like me to answer, if you have a topic you'd like me to discuss, or the community to discuss, you can type that in the chat. Otherwise, we'll read a sutta. Hello, perennial daydreams. Hope you're doing well. In general, doing well. I'm feeling a bit off today. I'm a bit tired and have a headache a little bit. So I don't know how long this Dhammapalooza will go. Just came off a good retreat this weekend. Did a Satipatthana retreat, and that went quite well. But I am in recovery mode from that retreat, as usually tends to happen. Retreat takes a lot out of me. Definitely seems like the time change might be affecting. Oh, I almost never get headaches. They're very, very rare. So yeah, I'm not too worried about it. It's just something to deal with for a little bit. It probably is that I could be dehydrated a bit. That's certainly true. In general, I think I'm just tired. Hello, Gregory. Welcome. We're just in that beginning section where people pass forward any questions or anything they like or topics they'd like me to discuss before we read a sutta. If there's nothing that comes up, I, as always, have a sutta in my back pocket that we can read. So we'll see how this goes. For those of you who are on, how does starting the hour earlier seem as something possible going forward? Is it better? Is it worse in terms of your schedule and time, where you are, the time zones, all that stuff? I was thinking for myself, because I by 9:30, I tend to be a little tired. Um, so I was thinking it might be better to do it early, and it might be better for we do have people in Europe who join and things like that. Um, so it could be a bit earlier for them. Of course, those of you on the West Coast, it goes back into your work period, but this is a good question. I was wondering if you think therapy is compatible with Buddhist practice. It's something I was considering going to, but does it just mean that my mindfulness isn't strong enough to let go of past experiences? Um, no, I think they're quite compatible. I myself did both. Um, I think that's a very good thing because they cover, in some ways, they cover two different aspects, or they cover your mind from two different perspectives, and both of those perspectives can be enlightening. They can be helpful, especially if you do have trauma or deep seated issues that you would want to take, or depression and chemical imbalances, all kinds of reasons why you would want to have some kind of therapeutic intervention. um so I think that if you can do both, it's no problem to do both. As a matter of fact, like I said, I did 4 years of therapy, and towards the end, let's see. No, I think I was already a Buddhist by the time. It was around the time I became a Buddhist is when I started my therapy, um, and I found it to be beneficial. Both. I think the thing that helped me the best was when the Buddhist path became my life path. Having that meaning and that purpose helped a lot. Helped a lot with dealing with mental stuff. But having somebody to kind of work through the things with was nothing to slouch at for 4 years. I think it's very beneficial. As a matter of fact, I work child protective services, and so I had a lot of contact with therapists, and especially towards the last couple years before I left to become a monk, many therapists were kind of getting um, certified in this mindfulness based stress reduction. So they were kind of doing, both like, classic like cognitive behavioral therapy and, mindfulness practices together. And I thought that was a good thing. I thought that this is a good thing that, my families, my clients might be able to have some benefit from doing some level of mindfulness or meditation. Um, and I've even thought, as a monk, if somebody, you know, thought of me as like a Kalyanamita, or, a teacher or whatever, and they wanted me to be a part of this, I thought it would be a cool thing. Like if a person had their monastic and their therapist who could kind of compare notes and talk to each other. So it's like having a team. Back in when I was in child protective services, um, I would, part of my job for my clients was to have family team meetings, and we would have, like, if therapists were involved, or play, all the different services and community organizations that were involved in the family would come together and I would kind of be the coordinator and host of the meeting because I was the case manager. Um, and I think that would be a pretty neat thing to for somebody to have their monk and their therapist work together. Um, but I haven't actually put that into practice just yet. It's not come up, but I have spoken to. Um, there's this one. He's probably one of the bigger lay Dhamma teachers in Colorado, and he's a one of those dudes like the Jack Cornfields and stuff. Like, I mean, he's like in his 60s, 70s. At one point, he was a monk. He's a therapist. He's back from the 60s kind of a dude. And I talked to him a little bit about that. He thought it might be an interesting idea. But hello, Joseph. Welcome. The community like to talk about how wonderful metta is. I've heard the term objectless compassion. I was curious what that would mean. I have no idea. Um, yeah, that sounds like somebody's kind of just word that they made up in a way. Um, what, I'll take a stab, or I'll take a guess into what it possibly might be meaning, and that is like when you in the suttas when you practice metta, it's not like how what's very common. The most common metta today is actually commentary over Suddhamagga metta, where it's like first you start with a teacher, then a loved one, then a neutral person, then an enemy, etc. Right? So you're the whole time your metta is focused on one individual. This you don't see in the suttas. In the suttas, metta is objectless, right? Because you're for all beings without limits, etc. The same thing with karuna, same thing with compassion. Right? Every time you see, or almost every time in the sutras, you see where the Buddha does the stock metta phrase, one abides pervading one quarter with a mind of goodwill, likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth. So above, below, all around, into himself, one abides, abiding pervading the all-encompassing world with a mind of goodwill. But then also, it's the same framework for a mind of compassion. Right? So even the Buddha's transcendent compassion is objectless. It's not, I see somebody suffering in the road and I feel compassion for them. That's mundane compassion. Objectless compassion is a grander view, a transcendent view, of understanding how we're all siblings in suffering and stuck in this samsaric state. That's that's what I would call objectless compassion. Other than that, I have no idea what whoever said this, what they mean by this. Gerger says, my wife and I found out that one of our older friends is having psychotic delusions, and I was wondering how meditation might help prevent it from arising later in my life. Are you worried that you might have psychotic delusions? I- are you talking about this is kind of like connected to like dementia, like connected to some level of old age? Is that the concern? I mean, I don't think psychotic delusions is connected with the average old person diseases. I think there's a bit more there. Um, well, I think that you cannot, in many ways, you can't really control what will happen when you get old. You don't know. Are you going to have Alzheimer's? You're going to have dementia. You're going to have this. You're going to have that. You don't know. You can read all kinds of studies. Studies show that having avocados will help with dementia or whatever. And so you go through life kind of being like that, trying to eat the healthiest or take the nutrition or whatever you need to do. And that may help or may not. We don't know. It's kind of a long-term gamble. But if you are practicing mindfulness, if you're practicing the Noble Eightfold Path, whatever happens, you'll definitely be better off for it. I think this is pretty much a given. No matter how old you get, like even Bhante G, Bhante G is such a widely respected, teacher. And, living with him, I saw like be forgetful, kind of just, like not understanding what people are asking. And he's going off on tangents, things like this. Um, and he's been meditating for, I don't know, 80 years, something like that, maybe even more, actually. Um, so this is just kind of like the nature of having this body, is that as you get older, things are going to fall apart. I think that if you're a practitioner from a young age, they'll probably fall apart less, or even if they do, you won't suffer as much because of it. So either way, it's beneficial just to practice, do your practice now and continue sincerely, honestly, dedicatedly do your practice, follow the Noble Eightfold Path, and whatever comes, comes. And no, I've not heard any research. Joseph says, what is the difference between spreading metta and dedicating merit? We shouldn't spread love to ghosts, I'm told. Instead, we should dedicate merit to them, which is interesting terms of grasping. Uh, yeah, I don't know. I think maybe I've heard that before. That's not really connected to anything in the suttas per se. You can give metta, when you give metta to all beings, then everybody's covered. Whether they're ghosts or humans or insects or aliens, whatever. When you give metta, everybody's covered. Nobody's, if you're doing it right, appamana, limitless, mahagada, exalted, then Everybody's covered. Now, sharing merit's an interesting thing. This is a tradition that is pre-Buddhist. This is the tradition that the Brahmins did um, before the Buddha was even around. And we see this because in one of the suttas, a Brahmin comes to the Buddha and says, uh, Bhante, it is our tradition that when a loved one dies, we dedicate our merits, we share merits with them, we make oblations, sacrifices, etc. Does this reach our loved ones? And the Buddha said, only in one place. That is the Peta realm, if they're ghosts. And so I love the Buddha's reply here. It's so Buddha. So then the Brahmin says, well, what if our relative is not in the ghost realm? Of course, this person is thinking my relative in this lifetime right now. The Buddha says, it is impossible, Brahmin, that from all you're faring on in this samsaric existence, that you do not have a relative in the ghost realm. Right? So this is wonderful and beautiful, isn't it? It's not just about this relative that you're attached to, that you're connected to in this life. It's all your relatives. How many relatives you've had in past lives, right? The Buddha says that you'd be hard pressed to meet anybody in your life who at one point wasn't your mother, your father, your brother, your sister, your spouse, your child. So this is the Buddha kind of trying to push us into a grander perspective than being attached to, this is my wife who died, or my husband who died, or my mother or father or sibling, whatever, who died. How can I share merit with them? So when you look at it this way, the modern way things are done is kind of missing this point in many, many ways. It's missing this point. Um, but I really like the Buddha's message there. That you have a relative in the ghost realms. It might not be from this life, but you have a relative there. Hello, Tyler. Good to see you. Hey, Ricky. Good to see you too. You have a. Oh, this is a tough one. Good evening, Bante. I watched a talk today about the Apanika Dhammas. I've never heard them put in a Pali together like that. I wonder where that's from. Sense restraint, moderation in eating, devotion to wakefulness. Are there any sutras that discuss them as a set in detail? The only thing I can think of off the top of my head is the gradual training. If you search for the gradual training suttas, these will all be included. I think that's probably the closest you're going to get to what you're asking for. There's two gradual trainings in the suttas. One starts with sila, the other one starts with dana. But they all move into sense restraint, moderation in eating, devotion to wakefulness, etc. So those might be the best bet to start to look for. If you're on the Discord, on the Discord, we have this thing where if somebody's looking for a specific sutta, there are some people who are really good at finding suttas and knowing suttas who subscribe to this tag called Sutta Hunter. So they'll do Sutta Hunter. I'm looking for XYZ, and then the Sutta Hunters will get on the track and see if they can track it down. I've even used it a couple times when I couldn't find it, when my Dhamma compendium has failed me, to see if anybody else might catch something that I'm missing. All right, let's see if anything comes in the chat in the next minute or two. And if not, maybe we'll read a sutta. And depending on how active and engaging you all are, maybe we'll continue after the sutta, or maybe I'll go to bed. It depends. Um, as I was saying, I'm fairly tired, so we'll see how long this Dhammapalooza lasts. But those of you who are joined now, I asked this question earlier, but how does this starting an hour early seem to you? Is it better? Is it worse? Starting at 7 p.m. New York time instead of 8 p.m. New York time? I was thinking that it's best to start a little bit early because I tend to be tired, you know, past 9. As the last half of Dhammapalooza, I tend to be tired, and it tends to be not as active, so I tend to um, end early. So maybe if we start early, more people, it's easier for people in Europe because we do have people. We have people like Matthias, we have people like Metika, who are in Europe, who are pretty, consistent um, community members. So it's a bit earlier for them. Raya, for you, it's way early, right? It's 4. Now, I did have to think that the people on the West Coast, it would be kind of like their last hour of work, but maybe you can listen in the last hour or on the ride home or whatever. I don't know, but if there was ever a huge West Coast contingent, then I might change it back. We have our interesting friend on Twitch. Hello, Diggs. All right. How can one know if they are out of balance either in sila, samadhi, or panya? I mean, I guess this is not sila, samadhi, panya. Sila, concentration, and mindfulness. Knowing the balance is part of the training. It's part of the practice. You have to find it. You'll see. I you might have a feeling or an intuition that says, I think I need to spend a little bit more time working on this aspect for a while. This is the best sutta for this is the Sona Sutta, right? Where the Buddha talks to Venerable Sona, who is really exerting himself, and he doesn't feel like he's getting any progression, any progress. So he thinks about returning back to the lay life. And the Buddha comes to him and asks him if he was skilled in playing the vina, the stringed instrument. And then this is where you get um, you know, the string too tight, the string too lax, and the string just in tune. And the Buddha is saying, tune it right and pick up your theme. This is not something that somebody can give to you. This is not something that somebody can really tell you because it's such an individual thing. Part of being, a practitioner, part of being a Maggaseka, a student of the path is, that's part of the path, part of your learning, part of your growth. Am I balanced out? Like especially when I was at Bhavana, when things were a bit more regular, I could notice, when in the evening sit that I think I'm going to do more sitting and less walking this time. I think I feel like my intuition and my my inner whatever is feeling I need to do more sitting, and that I'm ready to do it, and then I would. And that would last for however long. And then, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks. And then I'd go back. So you have to kind of be able to learn how to gauge yourself and to listen to yourself and to think and to figure out, well, how's my balance? Am I out of balance? Am I out of whack? Am I doing things wrong? We just the introduction chanting we did was the Gotami Sutta, right? The Gotami Sutta is a really good guide for this because it goes, Gotami, if these qualities you're practicing, that they lead to um, dispassion, disenchantment, freedom, then you know that these are the Dhamma. And so you have to be able to train. And this is a skill just like all the other parts of the practice that are skills. It's okay. It's going to take a while to kind of understand. And it's also part of the skill that to develop is being okay with uncertainty. You just don't know. So you do trial and error. You figure it out. You try, you see, oh, this doesn't work. You try something else. You do something, you reflect on it, you investigate it, you contemplate it after, and you think, no, that wasn't good. I don't mean like an unskillful action. I mean like a meditation, like in your practice. You're like, no, that actually didn't work out. I was less inclined to do it, and yeah, all these kind of things. That's part of the path. Part of following the path is being able to have that sixth sense, that gauge, that intuition for what's actually needed most on the path at this time. Mariah says, I'm feeling a lot of restlessness and anxiety. I think maybe my samadhi is out of balance. Well, go with that. If that's your intuition, well, how do you work with that? What exactly do you mean by out of balance? Is something off? What can you see about what's off? Investigate it. Joseph says this is more of a Mahayana bent, I don't necessarily know I'm qualified to really speak much on this, but I'll speak from a sutta perspective anyway. Do enlightened beings like non-returners? So non-returners are not enlightened. That's it. That's important. They're they're in the third level of awakening, but they're not fully enlightened yet. So that's important. Prostrate to Mettaya Bodhisattva. I'm assuming this is going to be the next Buddha, Mettaya. There's in Theravada, there's no need to prostrate to beings in samsara like this. So I don't know. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Maybe it depends on if they're a Theravada non-returner or a Mahayana non-returner. I read the Buddha only salutes the Dhamma and was curious about the relationship between Mettaya and other enlightened beings. So yeah, when the Buddha became awakened, a thought came to him, and the thought was that speaking of which, we actually have more people on with us than we have in the last while. So maybe starting earlier is good. But anyway, when the Buddha first became awakened, he had the thought, well, it's very good for beings to pay respects to somebody above you, right? To have that person above you. So he scanned the whole world to try to find somebody above a Sammasambuddha. and he couldn't find one because obviously there's nobody greater than a Sammasambuddha. So he bowed and paid respects to the Dhamma. He says, this Dhamma is supreme. It is above all. This Dhamma is what I will pay respects to. So that's what you're here. That's the sutta where you're hearing that from, Joseph. There's no talk of bodhisattvas and beings like this in the suttas. So there would be, and even so, still a bodhisattva is not a fully awakened Buddha by definition. So the Buddha would not pay respects to that. They would be less than a Sammasambuddha. As I said, a non-returner, maybe if they're a Mahayana non-returner, they'd prostrate to the bodhisattva. I don't know. Hello, those who have joined. If this is your first time joining the Dhammapalooza, please say hello in the chat so we can get to know you. This is a community event. This is not a just come and sit and listen to Bhante J talk for a couple hours event. This has always been an event of the community of Magaseka. So please, if you're feeling okay with doing so, say hello in the chat. Let's see who's here. If you have any questions you'd like me to answer, you can put a question in the chat as well. And if we don't have anything going on in the chat in a minute or two, we'll read a sutta. Hello, Scott from Seattle. Is this your first time on with us? And are you part of the Clear Mountain community? Hey, Sunny Free Spirit. The sin, that is Sin. Good to see you, Sin. Scott, yeah, I figured, when you said Seattle, I suspected you might. Are you on the Discord? The Clear Mountain and Magaseka have Discords, and we share a good amount of the same community. Ajahn Nisabo and Ajahn Kovilo are, I wouldn't say friends of mine per se. I don't know them that deeply, but I've known Ajahn Nisabo for a couple years. Two monks I quite like, and I hopefully will be visiting in the next year or so. Tyler says, what do you think about practicing other spiritual systems in some form of Dhamma syncretism under the framework of the Noble Eightfold Path? I would have to kind of see exactly what this means. Like how you would turn some other philosophy or spirituality into an eightfold path. I don't know that it would be the Noble Eightfold Path anymore. I don't know that you call it a Noble Eightfold Path after that. The Buddha is quite clear that this is the path, the only path that leads to awakening. So, I mean, if your goal is not awakening, then probably doesn't matter. But if your goal is awakening, I don't know that mixing and matching other things would probably be best. I would be interested in kind of seeing an example of that, though. I just have no clear comprehension of exactly how that would work. So, if you have an example, please feel free to type it in the chat. Send the link. Mariah says, can you explain the difference between nimittas or visions with something we should pay attention to versus just random images of meditation? Even nimittas you're not supposed to pay attention to, or at least not get attached to and excited about them. Because when you do, it just kicks you just get kicked away from getting anywhere close to any kind of jhana. Believe me, I know. The nimitta is a blessing and a curse in the same way. But see, nimitta, as we kind of know it, as it's kind of taught, is actually not in the suttas. Um, it does exist, though, or at least for some people, because I have seen it very clearly. And so I do know that it is something that some people can have. But any of these visions or anything like that, the nimittas, stuff that arises, you don't want to get fixated on it or attached to it. You just keep following the breath. You just keep doing what you're doing. Let the nimitta pass, and then you go beyond it. Nimitta just literally means signs. Nimitta is used in many, many different contexts in the suttas. Sense restraint. Somebody sees a sight with the eye. They don't pay attention to signs and features. Nimitta. So the word nimitta has a variety of different contexts. But yeah, I would say, and I know some teachers, some traditions do say to then you focus on the nimitta, and some don't. So it's a mixed bag in terms of what you think you should do if you have a nimitta arise as you're getting into jhanic quality meditation. All I know is don't get excited about it. That's your downfall. If you get excited, no good. And it takes a long time to let that excitement go. If images keep coming up, just recognize them. You say, oh, this is an image that keeps coming up. If it is a perpetually repeating image, well, maybe it's something to contemplate outside of your meditation. Maybe your mind is telling you something. That's something to investigate. Dharma learner says, "Good evening, Bante. Is following the 5 precepts enough to gain understanding? Is seeing the hibdur? I don't know what the hibdur is. Hindrances? I don't know. Is following the 5 precepts enough to gain understanding? Depends on what you mean by understanding. This probably needs a bit more clarifying. You can gain some wisdom in following the 5 precepts, but in and of themselves, um, they're not a path or a practice in and of themselves that develops wisdom. It's part of the path. Sin says, I have been learning just how strong the old ego and habits are. Yeah, yeah. Doing this practice is hard, but worth it. Thank you for your teaching. Yeah, no, of course it's hard. If it was easy, everybody would do it. If it was easy, the Buddha wouldn't have to call it a noble quest and call you on a quest and, give you, hype you up with virya, energy, and zeal and things. These are all qualities needed to continue on the path, or else you'll just stumble and fall and never not go forward again. You have to keep getting up and moving forward, even if you fall. Every time you see, every time you observe how your habits cause you suffering, how your mental processes, you know, uh, attachments, etc., cause you suffering. That's one little tidbit of wisdom gained, and over time that adds up. Hindrances in understanding the Four Noble Truths, better method than keeping the five precepts. The five precepts are part of understanding the Four Noble Truths. You can't really divorce the five precepts from the other aspects of the path. You should be doing all of it, right? There's if anyone is just doing part of it, they're not really doing the full path, and so they won't gain the full benefit of doing the path. Of course, they also won't have to let go of as much. Maybe that's it. They're not ready to jump in the full path, so they're just testing the waters, doing one part or another part. All right, let's read a sutta, and I think we'll call it a night. And if I'm not mistaken, I think there's a bit of comedy in this sutta, or I should say, a sutta comedy. You know, maybe you have to be in the know to get it, but let's share screen here. Majjhima Nikaya number 93 with Asalayana. So I have heard at one time the Buddha was staying near Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's monastery. Now at that time, around 500 Brahmins from abroad were residing in Savatthi on some business. Then those Brahmins thought, this ascetic Gautama advocates purification for all four classes. Who is capable of having a dialogue with him about this? So, right off the bat, you have to understand the culture of the time. This is the caste system, right? The lower castes are not getting purified. Really, only the Brahmins, only the higher class can be purified because they're born a Brahmin and then they know all the ways, all the secret rituals and oblations, and so then they can become purified. And this Buddha, this Gautama is saying that everybody can be purified. Who's going to go debate him? Who is capable of having a dialogue with him about this? Now at that time, the Brahmin student Asalayana was residing in Savatthi. He was young, newly tonsured. He was 16 years old. He had mastered the three Vedas, together with their vocabularies, ritual, phrenology, and etymology, and the testaments as fifth. He knew the philology and grammar, and was well versed in cosmology and the marks of a great man. This is a very, very, very skilled and knowledgeable 16-year-old. The type of 16-year-old you really don't see these days. This is quite a skilled 16-year-old. Then those Brahmins thought, this Asalayana is capable of having a dialogue with the ascetic Gautama about this. So they approached Asalayana and said to him, this ascetic Gautama advocates purification for all four classes. Please, Mr. Asalayana, have a dialogue with the ascetic Gautama about this. When they said this, Asalayana said to them, they say that the ascetic Gautama is a speaker of principle, so a speaker of Dhamma. But speakers of principle are hard to have a dialogue with. I'm not capable of having a dialogue with the ascetic Gautama about this. For a second time, those Brahmins said to him, this ascetic Gautama advocates purification for all four classes. Please, Mr. Asalayana, have a dialogue with the ascetic Gautama about this, for you have lived as a wanderer. And for a second time, Asalayana refused. For a third time, those Brahmins said to him, this ascetic Gautama advocates purification for all four classes. Please, Mr. Asalayana, have a dialogue with the ascetic Gautama about this, for you have lived as a wanderer. Don't admit defeat before going into battle. When they said this, Asalayana said to them, clearly, gentlemen, I'm not getting through to you when I say, he's saying, clearly, gentlemen, you're a bunch of boomers. When I say, they say that the ascetic Gautama is a speaker on principle, but speakers of principle are hard to have a dialogue with. I'm not capable of having a dialogue with the ascetic Gautama about this. Nevertheless, I shall go at your bidding. Then Asalayana, together with a large group of Brahmins, went to the Buddha, exchanged greetings with him. When the greetings and polite conversation were over, he sat down to one side and said to the Buddha, Master Gautama, the Brahmins say only Brahmins are the best caste. Other castes are inferior. Only Brahmins are the light caste. Other castes are dark. Only Brahmins are purified, not others. Only Brahmins are Brahma's rightful sons, born of his mouth, born of Brahma, created by Brahma, heirs of Brahma. What do you say about this? But Asalayana, Brahmin women are seen menstruating, being pregnant, giving birth, and breastfeeding. Yet even though they're born from a Brahmin womb, they say only Brahmins are the best caste. Other castes are inferior. Only Brahmins are the light caste. Other castes are dark. Only Brahmins are purified, not others. Only Brahmins are Brahma's rightful sons, born of his mouth, born of Brahma, created by Brahma, heirs of Brahma. Even though you say this, still the Brahmins maintain their belief? What do you think, Asalayana? So the Buddha is saying here, the Buddha is essentially kind of hoisting them on their own petard, basically, here with this argument, talking about purification. And even though, it might be seen as, as not this is old thinking. This is very traditional thinking of, menstruation being dirty and things like this. So, are impure. And this is why many, many cultures have things like menstrual huts, etc. So the Buddha is saying, oh, you're all pure, but Brahmin women, I see this, right? Kind of hoisting them on their own things. How is that pure? And so we're going to see where the Buddha is leading to what is actually pure. What do you think, Asalayana? Have you heard that in Greece and Persia and other foreign lands, there are only two classes, masters and slaves, and that masters may become slaves and slaves masters? Yes, I have heard that. Then what is the source of the Brahmins' self-confidence and forcefulness in this matter that they make this claim? So this is interesting as well. The Buddha is bringing in other cultures, basically saying, well, this is not a universal thing. Why are you so sure that this is, how are you so sure that you maintain this belief? Oh, okay. Okay. So, yeah. And then the young Brahmin says, even though you say this, still the Brahmins maintain their belief. What do you think, Asalayana? Suppose an aristocrat were to kill living creatures, steal, and commit sexual misconduct, to use speech that's false, divisive, harsh, nonsensical, and to be covetous, malicious, with wrong view. When their body breaks up after death, they'd be reborn in a place of loss, a bad place, the underworld, hell. Would this happen only to an aristocrat, not to a Brahmin? Or suppose a peasant? Or suppose a menial worker, a menial, were to act in the same way. So this menial would be like what we understand is like the untouchables, right? The lowest caste. Were to act in the same way. Would that result befall only a peasant or a menial and not so a Brahmin? No, Master Gotama, he replies. Hello, Anthony. Good to see you. If they acted the same way, the same result would befall an aristocrat, a Brahmin, a peasant, or a menial. Buddha's converting him already. The Buddha is, making sense to this young Brahmin. For if any of the four classes were to kill living creatures, steal, and commit sexual misconduct, to use speech that's false, divisive, harsh, or nonsensical, and to be covetous, malicious, with wrong view, then, when their body breaks up after death, they'd be reborn in a place of loss, a bad place, the underworld, hell. Then what is the source of the Brahmin's self-confidence and forcefulness in this matter, that they make this claim? And so he responds, even though you say this, still the Brahmins maintain their belief. Those old Brahmin boomers. What do you think, Kasalayana? Suppose a Brahmin were to refrain from killing living creatures, stealing, and committing sexual misconduct, from using speech that's false, divisive, harsh, and nonsensical, and from covetousness, malice, and wrong view. When their body breaks up after death, they'd be reborn in a good place, a heavenly realm. Would this happen only to a Brahmin, and not to an aristocrat, a peasant, or an menial? No, Master Gotama. If they acted the same way, the same result would befall an aristocrat, a Brahmin, or a peasant, or a menial. For if any of the four classes were to refrain from killing living creatures, stealing, committing sexual misconduct, from using speech that's false, divisive, harsh, nonsensical, and from covetousness, malice, and wrong view, then when their body breaks up after death, they'd be reborn in a good place, a heavenly realm. Then what is the source of the Brahmin's self-confidence and forcefulness in this matter, that they make this claim? And so Asalyana responds again, even though you say this, still the Brahmins maintain their belief. What do you think, Asalyana? Is only a Brahmin capable of developing a heart of metta, free of enmity and ill will for this region, and not an aristocrat, a peasant, or a menial? No, Master Gotama. Aristocrats, Brahmins, peasants, and menials can all do so. For all four classes are capable of developing a heart of metta, free of enmity and ill will for this region. Then what is the source of the Brahmin's self-confidence and forcefulness in this matter, that they make this claim? Even though you say this, Bhante, still the Brahmins maintain their belief. What do you think, Asalayana? Is only a Brahmin capable of taking some bathing paste of a powdered shell, going to the river, and washing off dust and dirt, not an aristocrat, peasant, or menial? No, Master Gotama. All four classes are capable of doing this. Then what is the source of the Brahmin's self-confidence and forcefulness in this matter, that they make this claim? Even though you say this, still the Brahmins maintain their belief. What do you think, Asalayana? Suppose an anointed aristocratic king were to gather 100 people born in different castes and say to them, "Please, gentlemen, let anyone here who was born in a family of aristocrats, Brahmins, or chieftains take a drill stick made of teak, sal, frankincense wood, sandalwood, or cherry wood, light a fire and produce heat. And let anyone here who was born in a family of outcasts, hunters, bamboo workers, chariot makers, or waste collectors take a drill stick made from a dog's drinking trough, a pig's trough, a dustbin, or a castor oil wood, light a fire and produce heat. What do you think, Asalayana? Would only the fire produced by high-class people be good quality wood, with good quality wood have flames, color, and radiance, and be usable as fire, and not the fire produced by low-class people with poor quality wood? No, Master Gautama, the fire produced by the high-class people with good quality wood would have flames, color, and radiance, and be usable as fire, and so would the fire produced by the low-class people with poor quality wood. For all fire has flames, color, and radiance, and is usable as fire. Then what is the source of the Brahmin's self-confidence and forcefulness in this matter, that they make such a claim? Bhante, even though you say this, still the Brahmins maintain their belief. The Buddha keeps coming in with all of these arguments, and the young Brahmin is agreeing with these arguments. You're making good arguments. Still, the Brahmins are set in their views. What do you think, Asalayana? Suppose an aristocrat boy was to sleep with a Brahmin girl and they had a child. Would that child be called an aristocrat after the father or a Brahmin after the mother? They could be called either. What do you think, Asalayana? Suppose a Brahmin boy were to sleep with an aristocrat girl and they had a child. Would that child be called an aristocrat after the mother or a Brahmin after the father? They could be called either. What do you think, Asalayana? Suppose a mare were to mate with a donkey and she gave birth to a mule. Would that mule be called a horse after the mother or a donkey after the father? If you never knew what a mule is, now you know. The cross of a donkey and a horse. It's a mule, as it is a crossbreed. I see the difference in this case, but not in the previous cases. What do you think, Asalayana? Suppose there were two Brahmin students who were brothers who had shared a womb. One was an educated reciter, while the other was not an educated reciter. Who would the Brahmins feed first at an offering of food for ancestors? An offering of a dish of milk rice, a sacrifice, or a feast of guests? They'd first feed the student who was an educated reciter. For how could an offering to someone who is not an educated reciter be very fruitful? What do you think, Asalayana? So here we see that this idea that giving to some people is more fruitful than giving to others is also a pre-Buddhist thing. What do you think, Asalayana? Suppose there were two Brahmin students who were brothers who had shared a womb. One was an educated reciter, but was unethical, of bad character, while the other was not an educated reciter, but was ethical, of good character. Who would the Brahmins feed first? They'd first feed the student who was not an educated reciter, but who was ethical and of good character. Another interesting point. For how could an offering to someone who is unethical and of bad character be very fruitful? And now here the Buddha is doing some summation. First you relied on birth, Asalayana. Then you switched to education. Then you switched to abstemious behavior. Now you've come around to believing in purification for the four classes, just as I advocate. All right, so the Buddha's like, gotcha. When he said this, Asalayana sat silent, dismayed, shoulders drooping, downcast, depressed, with nothing to say. Knowing this, the Buddha said to him, once upon a time, Asalayana, 7 Brahmin seers settled in leaf huts in a wilderness region. They had the following harmful misconception. Only Brahmins are the best caste. Other castes are inferior. Only Brahmins are the light caste. Other castes are dark. Only Brahmins are purified, not others. Only Brahmins are Brahma's rightful sons, born of his mouth, born of Brahma, created by Brahma, heirs of Brahma. The seer of Devala, the dark, heard about this. So he did up his hair and beard, dressed in magenta robes, put on his boots, grasped his golden staff, and appeared in the countryside of the 7 Brahmin seers. Then he wandered about the yard, saying, where have those Brahmin seers gone? Where have those Brahmin seers gone? Then the Brahmin seers said, who's this wandering about our courtyard like a cowpoke? That's an interesting translation. Cowpoke. Yeah. All right. Let us curse him. So they cursed Devala the dark. Be ashes, low life. Be ashes, low life. But the more the seers cursed him, the more attractive, good-looking, and lovely Devala the dark became. This is actually very interesting because we see this in another place in the sutta, the anger-eating demon, where the more the devas were angry and threw insults at the anger-eating demon, the more beautiful and attractive that demon became. It's this interesting dichotomy of like thinking you're making something worse, but actually you're not. It is benefiting from them. Then those Brahmin seers said, our fervor is in vain. Our spiritual path is fruitless. For when we used to curse someone to become ashes, ashes they became. But the more we curse at this one, the more attractive, good-looking, and lovely he becomes. Gentlemen, your fervor is not in vain. Your spiritual path is not fruitless. Please let go of your malevolence towards me. We let go of our malevolence towards you. That was quick. But who are you, sir? Have you heard of the seer Devala the dark? Yes, sir. I am he, sirs. Then they approached Devala and bowed to him. Devala said to them, I heard that when the 7 Brahmin seers had settled in leaf huts in the wilderness region, they had the following harmful misconception. Only Brahmins are the best caste, other castes are inferior. Only Brahmins are the light caste, other castes are dark. Only Brahmins are purified, not others. Only Brahmins are Brahma's right sons, born of his mouth, born of Brahma, created by Brahma, heirs of Brahma. That's right, sir. But do you know whether your birth mother only had relations with a Brahmin or not? With a Brahmin. We don't know that. So this is another important thing. It doesn't seem to be explicitly mentioned in the sutta. But in other suttas, you'll see that Brahmins, pure Brahmins, know that the mother and fathers of the last 7 generations have just been Brahmins. That's what it means to be a pure Brahmin. That none of your great grandparents married somebody below a Brahmin. Right? So this is what this is alluding to. This practice of making sure that your Brahmin line is pure. We don't know that, but do you know whether your birth mother's mother back to the 7th generation only had relations with Brahmins and not with non-Brahmins? We don't know that. But do you know whether your birth father only had relations with Brahmin women and not with non-Brahmins? We don't know that. But do you know whether your birth father's father back to the 7 generations only had relations with Brahmins and not non-Brahmins? We don't know that. But do you know how an embryo is conceived? We do know that, sir. An embryo is conceived when the 3 things come together. The mother and father come together. The mother is in the fertile phase of her menstrual cycle, and the spirit is present. But do you know for sure whether the spirit this is great, the Gandhava, whether it's a Brahmin or aristocrat or a menial, do you know before it's even born what caste it is? We don't know that. In that case, sirs, don't you know what you are? In that case, we don't know what we are. So even those 7 Brahmin seers were stumped when pursued, pressed, and grilled by the seer Devala on their own genealogy. So how could you succeed being grilled by me now on your own genealogy? You who have not even mastered your own tradition. When he had spoken, Asalayana said to him, Excellent Master Gotama, from this day forth, Master Gotama, remember me as a lay follower who has gone for refuge for life. Sadhu. So very interesting, very wonderful, and chock full sutta. I quite enjoy that sutta. It's been probably a bunch of years since I actually read it. But all right. Any comments, questions, clarifications in the chat? I'll give it a minute to see if anything pops in the chat. And I think if nothing, then we'll probably call it a night. But I think we're going to continue for the next while to do this, to do Dhammapalooza at 7 instead of 8. But we'll do it an hour early and see how it goes. Gregory, the Grand ABBA. What are they, a 1980s band? You're missing an H. Gundaba. But yeah, the Grand ABBA. Or was ABBA 90? I don't know. Anyway, I'm a little goofy right now, obviously. As probably can be told. Can seen. Well, the Gandhaba is an interesting thing because it has a couple different meanings. One of which are essentially Deva bards. They're musicians. They're Deva musicians. That's one aspect of a Gandhaba. Then they have the Gandhaba as the being, the consciousness, the being, that the mind, whatever you want to call it, that is ready to be reborn at the conception when mother and father come together. When these 3 things come together, a being is conceived in the womb. I'm surprised actually Bhante Sujato didn't translate it. Well, I guess here I forgot where I was reading. Maybe it was Sutta Monday where he translated as centaurs. And I know I was watching they did a 12-part Bhante Sujato and Aja Brahmali. You can search on YouTube. I highly recommend this series. They did like a 13 or 14-part series on dependent origination in the early Buddhist texts. This is a couple of years ago. And it's great. And in one of those, he talks about the Gandhava. And one of the kind of current theories is the Gandhava being connected to this being that's essentially like a centaur. Like in the time of the Buddha, part of the cosmology was a being who ferried beings to the next life. This like a half man, half horse kind of a thing. So if you look up, like if you go to Sutta Central and do a search for a centaur, you'll see it comes up. Bhante Sujata uses it as a translation. But all right, I think we're going to call it a night. Let's do final business. All right, friends. So if you are seeing this for the first time and you'd like to connect more with the community and with myself and seeing different events and different activities, please feel free to go to the website scrolling on the bottom of the screen, maggasekha.org, maggasekha.org, which is the ancient Pali language and which means student of the path or a trainee of the path. And that's what we are in the Maggasekha community. All those who follow the Noble Eightfold Path are trainees of the path, students of the path. So in there, you can find anytime. We just finished a Zoom retreat. We have another Zoom retreat next month. The end of August, we're doing a Metta retreat. I do various streams. Monday night Dhammapaloozas, Saturday afternoon Insight Timer sessions on if you're on Insight Timer. We also have the Maggasekha Discord online Sangha community. That is a community that comes together both in study and practice of the early, with the framework of the early Buddhist texts. And every Sunday night we read through suttas. We have been doing this almost every Sunday now for close to 7 years. We've gone through the Majjhima Nikaya, all of the Khuddaka Nikaya, and now we're probably 2/3 of the way through the Samyutta Nikaya. Been reading, pretty much weekly for all these years going through. So you're welcome to join us with that. If this community sounds like something you'd be interested in, you can send an email to the email listed on the screen, maggasekha@gmail.com, and we'll send you an invite to join us. All right. Let's share merits. Call it a night. Dukkha patta chane dukkha, bhaya patta chane bhaya, soka patta chane soka, hontu sabbe pipaniyo, etavata chamehi, sampatang punya sampatang, sabbe deva anumodantu, sabba sampatti siddhya, akasatta chabumata, deva naga mahidika, punyang tang anumoditva, charang rakantu sasanang. May the suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find relief. May all beings share this merit of ours that we've thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas, nagas, and yakas of mighty power, share this merit of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sad, sad, sad. All right, friends, thank you for coming and joining us in this Dhammapalooza. Also, I forgot to mention Monday through Friday at 8 o'clock in the morning, we do Morning Monastery Experience, which is a half-hour session of chanting and listening to a little bit of a short Dhamma before you start your day, at least if you're on the East Coast. If you're on the West Coast, then it's even earlier. But Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. New York time, join us for that half hour to start your day with some Dhamma. So, friends, Sukhi Hotu, may you be well and at ease, practice well and be well. May you have a spiritually successful and peaceful practice until we meet again.